Welcome to my channel of Gill Master Stories. Don't forget to subscribe button and press on the bell icon for more inspiration and mind-blowing stories. A wealthy woman mocks a young waiter, forcing him to sing for her amusement. But when his voice fills the room, the tables turn, leaving her stunned and questioning everything. It was a Saturday night at Haven's Table, a sleek restaurant perched in the heart of San Francisco's Marina District. The kind of place where conversation competed with the gentle clink of crystal glasses and the hum of a live jazz trio tucked in the corner. Inside, the crowd was predictably upscale. Tech execs celebrating million-dollar deals, couples indulging in anniversaries, and friend groups trading stories over artisan cocktails. Among them sat Eleanor Gray, mid-50s, with a wardrobe that screamed exclusivity and an air of entitlement that filled the room. Like the scent of her expensive perfume, Eleanor thrived on attention. Her laugh just a touch too loud, and her gestures exaggerated for the sake of an audience. She was seated with three friends, equally polished, but seemingly content to let her take center stage. A young waiter approached their table, with practiced grace, his name tag read Andre. But he avoided the kind of familiarity that invited first-name interactions. Early 20s, tall but unassuming, Andre carried himself with the precision of someone who'd been taught that mistakes weren't an option. His voice was low and calm as he recited the specials, though he avoided eye contact when Eleanor interrupted. "Why so serious, Andre? You're working at one of the best restaurants in the city." "Smile a little," she said, her tone dripping with mock cheerfulness. Andre's lips twitched upward, though the smile never reached his eyes. "Of course, ma'am. Is there anything else I can assist you with?" Eleanor leaned back in her chair, swirling the deep red wine in her glass. "Oh, I'm sure you can. But tell me, how does someone like you end up here? This job can't be your dream." The table chuckled softly. Andre's fingers tightened briefly around the edge of his tray, but he kept his face neutral. "I enjoy what I do, ma'am." It was the kind of response that frustrated people like Eleanor, who thrived on rattling others. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she'd found her next form of entertainment. But before she could press further, Andre excused himself to tend to another table. The evening carried on, the restaurant growing noisier as more patrons arrived. But Eleanor's gaze kept drifting back to Andrea, as though he were some puzzle she was determined to solve or break apart. But what Eleanor saw as an opportunity for amusement would soon become something she never expected. The wine flowed freely at Eleanor's table, and with every sip her confidence grew bolder. Laughter punctuated the air as her friends indulged her. Sharp commentary about everyone, from the hostess to the couple seated across the room. Andre became an easy target when he returned to their table to clear plates and refill glasses. Eleanor seized the moment. "Tell me, Andre," she began, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Do you have any hidden talents, or are you just good at carrying trays?" Her friends laughed, but the sound didn't feel kind. Andre paused for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickering toward hers, before he continued, stacking empty plates. "I just focus on doing my job well, ma'am." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Come on, don't be modest. You must have some kind of talent. You know, I heard people from your background often have musical gifts. Can you sing?" The table quieted. Even her friends shifted uncomfortably. But Eleanor didn't seem to notice or care. Her gaze was locked on Andrea, waiting for a reaction. Andrea straightened, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, ma'am." Eleanor leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Oh, don't be shy. Humorous, just a little something. It's all in good fun." The discomfort in the room was palpable. Now other patrons began to glance over. Sensing the tension, the jazz trio in the corner played on, oblivious to the unfolding drama. "Eleanor, maybe we should," one of her friends started, but she held up a manicured hand to silence him. "Please, I'm curious," she said, her tone sweet but laced with mockery. "What do you have to lose?" Andre's jaw tightened slightly, but his face remained calm. He looked around as though weighing his options. Walking away would cause a scene, but playing along felt like surrender. The seconds stretched the awkward silence, amplifying every clink of a glass and shuffle of a chair finally. Andre exhaled and nodded. "If it will make you happy." Ma'am Eleanor's lips curved into a victorious smile, and the table leaned in eager for the spectacle. A few nearby diners had also begun to watch. Their curiosity piqued. Andre stepped back, standing tall with his tray balanced against his hip. For a moment, he seemed to gather himself, taking a deep breath and closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the room seemed smaller, the chatter dimmer, and every gaze was on him. But no one was prepared for what came next. Andre's voice began softly, a low soulful hum that seemed to come from somewhere deep within him. The first few notes floated through the room, catching everyone off guard. The sound was raw, unguarded, and carried a depth of emotion that instantly silenced the table and then the entire restaurant. It wasn't just a song, it was a story. His voice swelled with a richness that spoke of struggle and hope, of pain and resilience. The melody was familiar to some, a timeless hymn that had endured generations, but the way Andrea sang it made it feel entirely new. Every note was laced with feeling, as though he was bearing a piece of his soul. Eleanor's smirk evaporated almost immediately. Her hand, which had been lazily swirling her wine, froze mid-motion. Her eyes widened slightly, as if seeing him for the first time. Around the restaurant, conversation stopped, forks hovered above plates, and the jazz trio set down their instruments, mesmerized like everyone else. Andre's voice climbed higher, filling every corner of the room. A waitress standing by the kitchen door dabbed at her eyes. A couple at the bar leaned closer, their expressions softened. Even the chef peered out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron as he listened. Eleanor's friends exchanged glances, their unease shifting to astonishment. One of them whispered, "I had no idea," but Eleanor couldn't speak. She sat motionless, her gaze fixed on Andrea, as though she were grappling with something she didn't understand. There was no mocking laughter now, no sly remarks, just silence and the undeniable power of the moment. As Andre approached the final notes, his voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of the emotion he was pouring out. The last note lingered, resonating in the stillness of the room, before fading into quiet. For a few seconds no one moved. It was as if the entire restaurant had been collectively holding its breath. Then slowly, the sound of applause began to ripple through the crowd. It wasn't polite or perfunctory, it was thunderous, heartfelt, and genuine. Patrons stood clapping and cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Andre gave a small nod, his expression calm, but his chest rising and falling heavily. As he caught his breath, he glanced at Eleanor briefly, then turned to walk back toward the kitchen. The tray still balanced at his side, Eleanor remained seated, her hands gripping the edge of the table, as though anchoring herself. Her face was unreadable, perhaps a mixture of shock, shame, and something she couldn't quite name. Around her, people continued to clap, but she didn't join them. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes trailing after Andrea as he disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. But Andre's voice wasn't just a performance, it was a reckoning, and it had left an impact Eleanor couldn't shake. The restaurant slowly settled back into its rhythm, though the atmosphere felt noticeably different. Conversations resumed, but they were softer, more reflective. The jazz trio hesitated before starting another tune, as if uncertain how to follow the gravity of what had just happened. Eleanor sat frozen, her once commanding presence diminished. Her friends avoided meeting her eyes, their discomfort evident. One of them finally broke the silence. That was something else, wasn't it? She didn't respond immediately. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass as she stared at the tablecloth for the first time that evening. Eleanor looked unsure of herself, as though the foundation of her confidence had cracked. "I didn't expect," she began, but the words trailed off. What could she say? That she hadn't expected him to be extraordinary, that she thought she could break him with a joke. She glanced around the room, noticing how many people were still talking about Andre. A couple at a nearby table looked over and shook their heads disapprovingly. their judgment unspoken but loud enough. Her chest tightened with an unfamiliar feeling. Was it regret, embarrassment? Maybe both. She reached for her wine, but didn't drink, setting the glass back down, as though the taste no longer appealed to her. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Andre leaned against a counter, his hands trembling slightly. One of the line cooks patted him on the back. "Man, you've got some pipes," he said with a grin that was unreal. Andrea offered a small smile, though his mind was elsewhere. He'd been singing his entire life, mostly in church choirs and community events. But he never imagined his voice would matter in a place like this. Not like that. He wiped his hands on a towel, taking a moment to steady himself before returning to the dining floor. When he stepped back out, the applause had stopped. But the stares lingered. People whispered as he passed, some smiling warmly, others giving him nods of respect. He approached Eleanor's table cautiously, unsure of what to expect. She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was no trace of mockery in her eyes. If anything, she seemed vulnerable. "Thank you for sharing that," she said quietly. Her voice lacked its usual edge, replaced by something softer, almost uncertain. Andrea met her gaze, his face calm but firm. "I didn't do it for you," he replied simply, his tone polite but resolute. Then, with a professional smile, he added, "Let me know if you need anything else," and walked away. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard by his response. She watched him retreat to another table, her chest tightening again. For someone so used to commanding attention, she suddenly felt very small. But while the moment was over, the lessons it carried were just beginning to settle into the room. And into Eleanor's heart the night wore on. But for Eleanor, it felt as though time had stopped. The buzz of conversation around her faded into the background as she replayed the moment in her mind. The depth of Andrea's voice, the emotion in his expression, and most haunting of all, his quiet, piercing words, "I didn't do it for you." Her friends tried to shift the mood, laughing about trivial topics and ordering dessert. But Eleanor remained detached. The same woman who had thrived on commanding the room now seemed entirely consumed by her thoughts. As the check arrived and the table began to settle up, Eleanor glanced toward the kitchen door. She watched Andrea as he moved between tables, graceful and composed, treating every patron with the same level of professionalism and care. There was something about him that now felt untouchable, as though the performance had elevated him far beyond the role she had tried to box him into. Eleanor sighed and reached for her purse, pulling out a crisp bill that she folded neatly into the check presenter. She hesitated for a moment before writing something on the back of the receipt and closing it as the group stood to leave. She lagged behind, scanning the room one last time before stepping out into the cool night air. Back in the restaurant, Andre returned to the table after the group had gone. He opened the check presenter and found the bill, along with a note scribbled in delicate handwriting. "Your voice has a power I didn't expect. Thank you for reminding me what humility sounds like." Andrea read the words twice, his face unreadable. He tucked the note into his pocket, not for validation, but because it felt like a rare acknowledgement of something deeper. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. That night, as Eleanor rode home in silence, she stared out of the window, seeing her reflection in the glass, but not recognizing herself. The memory of Andrea's song lingered, challenging her to confront the ways she used her privilege for the first time in years. She felt the stirrings of change, small but undeniable. Meanwhile, Andre returned home to his modest apartment, greeted by the warm glow of a single lamp and the faint scent of coffee. He placed the note on his kitchen counter, then sat down with a deep exhale. The night had been exhausting, but it had also been affirming. He didn't need Eleanor's approval, nor anyone else's. His voice, his dignity, they had always been enough. The story reminds us of the quiet power of authenticity and the profound impact of respect. It challenges us to consider how we treat others and the ways our actions, even small ones, can resonate far beyond the moment. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. For more content, please leave your comments and share your experiences. Thank you for being part of Gill Master Stories community. See you soon.